Hi, my name is Nashwalina Khan, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Reimagining Disabled Futures, a podcast from Dawn Canada. This series is about centering the voices of disabled women and gender diverse people as we imagine what our futures can and should look like. Futures rooted in justice, care, and possibility. Reimagining Disabled Futures is part of Dawn Canada's 10-year vision for change. Root resilience, root change, and root justice. Through these conversations, we're exploring what resilience means in our communities, how real change happens, and how justice can guide us toward more inclusive, intersectional, feminist, and liberatory futures. We invite you to listen, share, and join us as we build futures where disabled people not only survive, but thrive. Bonjour, hi.
Hello.
Welcome to the Reimagining Disabled Futures podcast, where Nashwalina Khan
and Aaron Decker,
your hosts, exploring what a feminist recovery looks like for disabled women and gender diverse people in Canada. Using an intersectional disability justice lens, we interviewed participants across Canada about living well, access to necessities, and visions for a feminist recovery.
We understand we navigate colonized lands throughout so-called Canada, and as a result, settler colonialism, capitalism, and other oppressive systems impact how disabled women and gender diverse people experience life here. Decolonization means land back and Indigenous sovereignty.
The following interviews prioritize Black, Indigenous, and people of color and gender diverse people. We still recognize that there are limitations to our work. Reimagining Disabled Futures includes the voices of women and gender diverse people with lived experiences from coast to coast. These interviews only represent a small snapshot into the experiences of diverse people with disabilities throughout Canada.
Today's episode is all about disability and relations, navigating systems, family, and other social relations.
Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by Brad and Pam from Disability Justice Network Ontario. Dawn is inherently abolitionist in its nature, and the links between carcerality and disability are quite clear. And so today we're going to talk more with Brad and Pam about why these links are clear and why we should care as disability justice advocates. So Brad and Pam, could you introduce yourselves to the audience today, please?
My name is Pam. I'm the prison project lead at Disability Justice Network of Ontario. My pronouns are they, them. I'm brain injured. I have an education in social work. I used to do street outreach, which there's a lot of overlap between street outreach and justice involved folks.
And I'm Brad Evoy. I'm a member of the Halabu Mi'kmaq Nation, originally from out in Western Newfoundland. And prior to coming on as DJNO's executive director, I was in the legal clinic system, more on the admin side, but definitely crossing over into the justice side of things as well. And my pronouns are he, him.
Amazing. And the first question I wanted to ask you folks, and maybe Pam can go first and then Brad can go, is how do incarcerated people who also live at other intersecting identities like different ability or race or economically, but especially with disability at that intersection, how do incarcerated folks or justice involved folks experience the criminal justice system differently than perhaps somebody who doesn't have that intersecting identity?
Okay, it's gonna be a bit tangential because I'm gonna talk a bit about history first, but I will get to answering your question. We can't talk about prisons without talking about cops, and policing in Canada started with white police protecting white people and white property from enslaved Black people and Indigenous people. Though, there's been a lot of, in quotations, like reconciliation attempts, and the system is still inherently very racist and ableist. I mean, we can see that with other policies as well. So the prison system and who's in it definitely mirrors the ableism and racism that continues to exist. So overrepresented populations continue to be Black people, Indigenous people, disabled people, gender diverse people. And that's not because those populations are committing more crimes, but they're over surveilled. And what a white person a white abled person might get away with, racialized disabled person wouldn't. And that's not to say like a crime even, but just anything that seems different from the norm. Like if you're autistic and not making a lot of eye contact, that can be seen as like combative rather than just a different way of communicating. So how do disabled people experience the prison system differently? From the interviews that we've done with folks, a lot of people end up getting put into segregation. So you're isolated, which exacerbates existing disabilities and also creates new ones. It's supposed to be torture to be put in isolation for more than 15 days, even though to me or anyone, 15 days is a really long time. And the average last year was between 19 and 26 days in Ontario. So, and that those weren't isolated incidences. Those are Statistics Canada statistics that you can look up online. So that's like increased segregation is one way. Delayed access to medication, or even trying to enforce that you do need medication. So many people that we've interviewed have said that like they'll put in request after request after request, because anything that you want, you have to submit what's called an inmate request form. Sometimes people don't get medication for months, and this isn't things like, there's also violence, and that's not just between prisoners, but instigated by corrections officers or COs. Recently, we spoke with a lawyer whose client is deaf and didn't receive any accommodations at all. So no interpreter. So that can create issues as well, not knowing like what's going on or what's being expected of you. Basically, in a nutshell, if you're not disabled going in, you'll probably become disabled by the time you're released. And if you are disabled going in, you will probably leave with more disabilities than you arrived.
Thank you so much, Pam. Is there anything else perhaps that Brad you wanted to add to this question before we move on?
Yeah, I think that, what Pam touched on there at the end is really important, right? I think we have to think about the criminal justice system and, in particular, incarceration, like as a site of disablement and as a site of harm for folks, in various communities, but in particular for racialized communities, right? So I think that when we talk about the experience of, disabled people, in the criminal justice system, I think what we're often talking about is at that intersection of racialization and disability and what that means. And I think that, when we look at the broader criminal justice system and even the intersections in towards, moving towards incarceration, we know very well, the statistics of Black and Indigenous folks in terms of intersecting with earlier parts of the criminal justice system, of intersections with police, of intersections with, lawyers and judges and all of those pieces, and even navigating the medical system for evidence and for other sorts of things to back up what people, need in this process. So I think that that intersection is really important for our work and really important for us in terms of being able to center that in terms of the work of of DJNO moving forward, when we look at the broader legal system and the kinds of reforms that might be needed and the kinds of changes that are needed, in an abolitionist framework.
Thank you, Brad. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit about what reforms are needed, especially with that disability justice perspective in mind?
Yeah. So I think, the way that we would perceive things, I think much like Dawn, we are an abolitionist organization. Prisons should not exist. There is no need for the existing prison system. It does not serve, community in any viable way. I think we need to dismantle that system. On the other hand, in the moment, we do need to work really hard to ensure that folks have access to medication, that folks in the moment can survive this system that is really, fundamentally, if we look at the broader history of criminalization, policing, and incarceration, meant to harm our communities, meant to harm individuals and make it difficult for us to, move through them. So I think being able to, work to ensure that folks have access to everything from, basic accommodations to insulin to, be able to be in spaces where, they're not isolated. So in that way is really important. And I think that Pam touched on that when describing the system. All of those areas are areas that we need to tackle, but tackling them within the prison system is not enough. Simply moving to remedy those problems won't prevent the creation of further sites of disablement within the criminal justice system. So I think that ultimately, the biggest reform is the dismantling of those systems fundamentally.
Thank you both. And I have kind of a thread of a thought that I want to see, since you both have talked to so many folks on these issues, which is, although the organization is based in Ontario, we know institutions and prisons exist throughout Canada where it's a site of disablement. It's also a site of, unfortunately, death. Like, I'm thinking about Ashley Smith's death in New Brunswick, but then we had Suleiman Fakiri in Ontario, and it's a national issue where it's not only folks get more disabled, disabled folks also die in prison. And I wanted to know if what DJ Ono's work on this front is, or also like if you've seen any kind of progress, or there's like, what are the positions DJ Ono wants to hold in this sense? I just want to hear from you folks, because you know more about what's going on and you folks do this work, and it's really tragic and horrible that it goes beyond disablement, where it's like the ableism becomes death.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the worst case. And lots of people we've spoken with like say that they don't know like if they're even gonna like make it out alive, and they're not like hyperbolizing or exaggerating that fear. And again, it's an example that comes to mind of someone who recently passed away, but didn't pass away in prison, but they were a gender diverse person. And when they, at intake or whatever, like they asked for a woman to do the strip searching, because they have to do strip searching, and they were denied. And it was just like a completely like humiliating process for them. And so going in to like the custody area, they said that they like would have been fine, but like the COs took it upon themselves to out this person to like everyone in the unit, which created an unsafe situation. Whereas like that person could have like continued doing their time, and like people like didn't have to know that about them. So I looked at the stats recently for deaths in Ontario, and I think last year or the year before it was like 37. And that's just like quietly, again, in like Statistics Canada, like there shouldn't be any at all. But yeah, and I think most of those were Indigenous people, and it doesn't elaborate on anything like that. So that's definitely like a concern that we have, folks on the inside. And one of, I guess, like a small way that we like help prevent that is through our phone lines, talking to people, but then sending them mail. Because if on the inside, like COs know that there is somebody like keeping tabs on this person, then like it does create a little bit more safety, even though like we're grasping at straws here talking about safety.
Rod, would you like to speak to this question?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to our work, I mean, I think you've touched on a little bit in mentioning the Justice for Soli campaign. It's something that we've supported really strongly since our founding. I think that we're always there, like Pam had said, to have in place our phone lines and have different resources to try to help navigate those systems. That's why we're working on a toolkit to work through a whole bunch of these areas, both for folks, in the adult kind of space, but also looking at youth criminalization as well. So I think that, like, for us, those are the practical tools that we've been able to offer. But I think that, overall, I think that the big kind of push is always going to be towards building a common understanding of an abolitionist like politic within disability related spaces. I think that, it's wonderful that DJ and O and Don have this perspective, but I think that building that across a community where we can, have those discussions and value disabled prisoners in this space across, disability related movements is something that, we need to continue to push for and, continue to reshape some of the ideology that's present in, a lot of our own spaces as well.
Thank you. So carcerality shapes and informs our society at large, including other systems that people engage with, like social services and healthcare. Why does disability justice in prisons matter to the world beyond prisons?
Like, a few things come to mind. There is a lot of intersectionality, and a lot of people think that like, it's that whole thing about how people think they're closer to becoming a millionaire than they are homeless, but most people like are more like proximal to homelessness than not. And there's this really individualized perspective, like, that's embedded in capitalism as well, that if somebody is incarcerated, they are there because they did something bad or they're a bad person, rather than there's like so much context, and that most people even in there are just waiting on bail, like, so haven't been sentenced yet, if we're going to talk about that sort of thing. So people are being put in these like super oppressive environments that, like, even if they did the worst thing in the world, like, aren't reducing the likelihood of them reoffending. So yeah, whereas like the things that do reduce crime are things like housing, like mental health supports, like access to quality education, healthcare, like really basic things. And like in our interviews, we ask like, what do you think like would have helped you like avoid prison or stay out of prison? And I feel like the number one thing that is said is like housing, like support during, some traumatic things that happened when you're like a child and don't have autonomy, like the autonomy that you do as an adult. Supports for navigating various kinds of disability. So I think when we're talking to members of the public and we start talking about those things and prevention, and it's not the things that we're bombarded with, like on media and like true crime podcasts and the small tiny percentage of people who have antisocial personality disorder. And even then, when you look at, there's lots of people among us that have antisocial personality disorder and don't go on to commit serial like heinous crimes. And like that's more often seen in individualist communities and cultures. So there is a relationship and a correlation between individualism, hyper capitalism, hyper individualism in society, and like more removed from community, which if you're more anonymous, then you can, or it's easier to dehumanize people if you don't have a relationship with them.
Yeah, and on that too, I think, when we look at a lot of, and I've been saying this a lot since I'm starting at DJNO, it's like a lot of the logics of the work that we deal with, I think we run up a lot in terms of carceral logics, like within broader society, right? Like if we look at the logics of long-term care institutions for seniors and for disabled folks across ages, like, it is a very carceral logic. If we look at, the logics of isolation and punishment in school, folks, like with the recent death of Landon Ferris, right, in Ontario, and many more prior. It's again a very carceral logic. It's bringing the logic of the prison into other parts of society. And I think that that's a very fundamental part of, I think, what we have to challenge as an organization. And it's something that is I think, at the core of our work, right? And I think, we've, over the years, when you table at different kinds of things, you always get a very interesting sense of people, right? So starting with DJNO, I've been doing a lot of like front facing kind of tabling work. And when we tell people we do, prisoner justice related work, it's always a bit of a question of like, oh, that's different, or that's like outside of what I would have expected you to do. Um, but the reality is that I think that is so fundamental and core to what we do and core to the logics we're trying to challenge, not just in the prison system and in the legal system, but within everything that we do. Like, I think that, if we look at transit and we look at the ways in which people are harassed by fare enforcement, and we're talking about this in Hamilton now, right? It's still an incredibly fundamentally carceral logic that's applied against, racialized disabled people. And that is very much the colonial core of it all. When Pam started talking about the establishment of police, some of the earliest, be it the predecessors of the RCMP, were established to clear Indigenous people from our lands. And so all of this comes back, I think, to this idea of, colonial enclosure, moving people from our lands. And that's kind of the core of a lot of these carceral logics that exist across our society.
Thank you both so much. And I have kind of a broader question that you can answer in whichever way makes sense. But you've both kind of touched on prison as a site of disablement, and how if you are not disabled, you will likely leave disabled. And if you are disabled, you will likely leave more disabled. And I'm thinking through work like the work of Jasbir Puar on like the right to maim, and how occupation and other systems of oppression essentially lead to disablement or maiming, right? And this is a big disability justice kind of, if you do basic disability studies, you start to get into it, but it makes sense. But I want to ask more clearly and broadly to both of you, how does prison cause disability and disablement for an audience who might not understand that? Like, in which ways? You've kind of touched on it. Or how does system failure lead to disabled people being incarcerated at different rates that are disproportional as well? So that's two questions kind of, but take them both as you will.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for pointing that out. So brain injuries are a big one through violence. Also prolonged periods of segregation and isolation means you don't have access to natural sunlight, or exercise even. There's a lot of institutions that are overcrowded. So that means in a cell, you have a person on the bottom bunk, a person on the top bunk, and one person on the floor. There's not really walking space. I did some interviews last month, I want to say, and someone told me that in the summertime, they're typically on lockdown Thursday to Monday sort of thing, because I guess like people take the weekend off. And that's not a plug to be like, oh, the solution is hiring more COs. It's like you're literally warehousing people and treating them like worse than animals. So three days out of the week, assuming there isn't more lockdowns, on those 3 days, you're in your cell for 23 hours a day with 3 other people that you can hopefully keep the peace with like, I don't know, like if I was in a tiny room with 3 other people, like it would, yeah, especially with different access needs. We've talked with people who you're sleeping on a thin cot with a thin blanket and in quotations pillow. So if you don't have any neck or back pain going in, like you're certainly, and like if you're there for any period of time waiting for court or trial, even so, like that can cause back and neck pain. The quality of the food is poor, so that can cause gastrointestinal issues, diabetes. I mentioned, I think at the beginning, that I have a brain injury, and so for me going in there, it is a sensory nightmare. And what I mean by that is that the fluorescent lighting is like horrible. A lot of the areas are very echoey. So yeah, it's a sensory nightmare. And so if you go in with a brain injury or you end up getting one while you're in there, then yeah, it's or if you don't even have a brain injury, but you have sensory issues, yeah, those are the ones that come to mind, but I'm sure I'm missing some.
Yeah, and I guess, when I think about this stuff in terms of, how the system leads disabled people to incarceration, I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but to kind of bring it into focus, I think the idea that, we are living in a fundamentally ableist society that already has a lot of these carceral logics in place. So when we look at things like a lack of access to housing, a lack of, benefits and supports if folks need those, or stable, non-ableist workplaces for folks who can exist in those spaces, ultimately, those sorts of things lead people towards incarceration. Ultimately, if it's paying fines on transit, or looking towards a situation where one is unhoused and criminalized for that, there are many sites in which one can be pushed towards incarceration. And ultimately, as we've noted, that's the logic of the system that we're in. And I think that ultimately that is the direction that a lot of the system pushes us towards, right? I think as disabled people, and in particular racialized disabled people, Black and indigenous racialized disabled people, I think being able to resist that where we can and provide community supports is the answer to some of that. But ultimately challenging and deconstructing parts of these systems, is where we need to head. And I think, we can expand those kind of logics out even further, right? I think mentioning Jibir Puar is really pertinent at this moment. We are in a moment where we can see the necropolitics, the logics of incarceration, being exacted on a global scale in Palestine. Looking at Gaza as a site of mass incarceration and mass disablement, and seeing these logics play out, on a fundamental, international scale, is something that we're seeing right now, and is also why it's so important for folks involved in, disability related work and work around the carceral system to also turn our attention internationally and look at, broader issues around Palestine and other places around the world that we know are sites of mass disablement as well.
Thank you so much. Yes, Pam and Brad, I appreciate this so much. To kind of close us out today, is there anything else you would like to share with us about this topic? Or if there's any takeaways that you'd like listeners to leave with after listening to this podcast, what would you like them to know?
We usually ask that question at the end of interviews, so I'll just echo what a lot of prisoners have said, which is basically not to judge a book by its cover, and really take the time to understand like the layers of how people end up where they end up and leave worse for it. We recently launched a toolkit for anyone navigating the criminal legal system. There's a section for youth and there's a section for adults. It can be found online at enablingjustice.com, ENABLINGJUSTICE.com. Free Palestine.
And folks, for me, all I'll say, and I think I'll build a little bit from Pam there, which is, the whole point of DJNO is that we look to envision a world where, disabled people are free to be and free hold systems to account. And so, we're here to continue to do that. We look forward to working with friends and partners to do that, both provincially, locally, but also nationally and internationally. So we're here. If you have projects, you have thoughts, if you have issues you want to take on, we're here to support and be there, and look forward to working with everyone in the future.
Thank you both. And I appreciate that link for enablingjustice.com. Is there any other places that listeners can find you or connect with DJNO online?
You can find us at DJN Ontario on most social media platforms, and our website is djno.ca.
Thank you for listening to Reimagining Disabled Futures, a new podcast from Disabled Women's Network of Canada. You've been listening to a conversation with Brad Evoy, Executive Director of Disability Network Ontario, and Pam Rainio, Outreach Coordinator of DJNO. We hope you enjoy this episode. It was produced by Andre Goulet. This podcast is made possible with support from Women and Gender Equality Canada. To learn more about the work we do at Dawn Canada, visit dawncanada.net. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. Stay tuned for another episode of Reimagining Disabled Futures next month. Until then, I'm Neshwalina Khan, Senior Research Associate at Dawn Canada. Thank you for listening.